All right, everybody, welcome to another deep dive, this time into the world of crane operational aids, brought to you by Safety One Source.
Absolutely.
I'm
And
excited to jump into this one.
yeah, me too. This stuff's super important, for people who operate cranes, want to operate cranes, and, even for the safety folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to be talking about OSHA regulations specifically. So we're looking at the real deal here.
Straight from the source.
Straight from the source. Now, when we talk about operational aids, what are we actually talking about?
So operational aids are essentially devices that are there to help prevent accidents or incidents from occurring when you're operating a crane. So it's kind of like a built-in safety net in a way.
Okay, so they're almost like an extra set of eyes helping to watch over things?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and OSHA actually has, as they like to do, they like to categorize things. So we've got two categories of operational aids.
Okay, love categories. Gotta love categories. So what are the two categories?
We have Category 1 and Category 2.
Okay, and is this like the difference between forgetting your coffee versus forgetting your hard hat or something?
Sort of. So basically the categories are all about how critical the aid is and how quickly you need to address it if it malfunctions.
Okay.
So you can think of Category I as the ones that are like the non-negotiables. You absolutely cannot operate without these.
Okay.
And if one of these malfunctions, you have 7 days to get it repaired.
7 days. That's a pretty tight window.
It is, yeah. It's pretty strict.
Yeah.
But there are a couple exceptions to that rule. So, for example, let's say you've ordered the parts you need, but they're delayed.
Okay.
If you can prove that you ordered them promptly, then you get a little breathing room there.
Okay.
And then once those parts arrive, you get another 7 days to complete the repair.
Okay. So it's not totally unreasonable, but it is definitely something that has to be taken care of quickly.
Right. It's urgent.
Yeah. Okay. So Category I, super important. Can't operate without them. What about Category 2?
Category 2 aids are still important, of course. But if one of those malfunctions, you have 30 days to get it fixed as long as you've ordered the parts promptly. And just like with Category I, you get that 7-day grace period once the parts arrive to get it fixed.
Okay. So a little more wiggle room there.
A little, yeah.
It's still pretty important, I imagine.
All right.
All right. So let's talk about some examples because I'm sure people are wondering, like, what are these things? What are we talking about?
Sure. So some examples of Category I operational aids would be things like a boom twist limiting device.
Okay. And what does that one do?
So that's the one that's going to prevent the boom from being raised too high, which could be disastrous, obviously.
Yeah.
So if this device malfunctions, OSHA gives you some specific alternative measures that you can take.
Okay. So let's say that goes out. What are our options?
So there's two options, and you only have to do one of them.
Okay.
The first option is to use a boom angle indicator. So that'll give you a nice visual representation of where your boom is positioned so you don't raise it too high.
Okay.
Okay,
So what's the other option?
The other option is to put a mark on the boom hoist cable. And that mark will act as a visual cue for either the operator or a designated spotter, so they know when to stop the hoist before the boom reaches a dangerous height.
Okay, so it's just about having that visual indicator, whether it's a fancy indicator or a literal mark on the cable.
Right, and sometimes you have to get creative if the operator can't directly see that mark on the cable. So you might have to use mirrors or even a remote camera system with displays.
Oh, wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's just one example of a category. Operational aid, what's another one?
Another one would be the anti-tube blocking device, and that is designed to prevent the load block from contacting the boom tip.
Okay, and I'm assuming that's not a good thing.
It's not good at all.
Yeah.
That could lead to all kinds of damage, dropped load damage to the crane itself, or even a collapse.
Okay, so that's definitely one we want to make sure is working properly.
Yeah.
Now, are the requirements for that one the same across the board, or does it depend on what type of crane we're talking about?
So the requirements do vary depending on the type of crane. So for telescopic boom cranes that were manufactured after February of 1992, they have to have an automatic anti-tube blocking device. So basically it just kicks in and prevents that contact from happening.
Okay, so no human intervention required there.
Exactly.
Nice. What about lattice boom cranes?
So for lattice booms that were manufactured after February of 92, they can have either an automatic device or they can have a device that just warns the operator when they're getting close to that tube blocking situation.
Okay.
But there's been an update to that rule.
Okay.
So now for any lattice boom cranes manufactured after November of 2011, they are required to have that automatic device, no exceptions.
Okay, so kind of phasing out that warning only type.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Now, you said there were some exceptions with the older lattice booms.
Yes. So there are certain types of work where that automatic anti-tube blocking device is not required on those older lattice booms.
Okay, what kind of work are we talking about?
So that would include things like clamshell or grapple work, using magnets or drop balls, or even pile driving.
Okay, so very specific types of work.
Right.
But in those cases where the automatic device isn't required, what happens if it does malfunction? Are there any temporary measures?
There are. So if the anti-tube blocking device malfunctions on one of those older lattice booms, you have a couple of options. You can either mark the cable, which will give the operator a visual reference point, or you can always rely on a dedicated spotter.
Okay, so those are kind of our backup plans if that device goes out.
Right.
Okay, so those are two pretty critical category operational aids. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some Category 2 aids.
Okay.
Like what's one that comes to mind?
So a good example of a Category 2 operational aid would be the boom angle radius indicator. And that's the device that helps the operator know where the boom is positioned.
Okay, so it's almost like a GPS for the boom.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
I like it.
Yeah.
But what happens if that one breaks down? What's our backup plan?
So if your boom angle radius indicator malfunctions, you're going to have to go old school.
Okay.
You're going to have to manually determine that boom angle or radius.
So break out the measuring tape, I guess.
Exactly.
Back to basics. I like it.
Yeah.
What's another interesting Category 2 aid that we should know about?
So another important one would be the outrigger stabilizer position sensor.
Okay. And what does that one do?
That one makes sure that your outriggers or stabilizers are extended to the correct position. So essentially making sure that your crane has a nice stable base.
Super important.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't want the whole thing tipping over.
Right, exactly.
So what happens if that sensor decides to take a break?
If that sensor malfunctions, then the operator has to manually verify that the outriggers are properly extended before they begin any operations that require the outriggers.
So no cutting corners there. Got to double check.
Absolutely.
Okay. What else is lurking in the world of Category 2 aids?
One more that I'll mention is the hoist drum rotation indicator.
Okay. And that's important because...
So that one's especially important when the operator can't see the hoist drum directly.
Okay. Help me understand that.
Yeah.
If they can't see the drum, what's the problem?
So imagine this. The operator is controlling the hoist, but they have no visual confirmation of whether the drum is winding or unwinding the cable. So that could lead to a situation where they think they're raising the load, but they're actually lowering it.
Oh, yeah. That's a big problem.
It is.
Okay. So this indicator makes sure that they know what's going on with the drum, even if they can't see it.
Exactly.
But what if the indicator itself malfunctions?
So if the hoist drum rotation indicator goes out, you can always revert back to using a marking system on the drum itself, and that'll give the operator that visual cue they need.
Okay. So it's like a low-tech version of the indicator.
Yeah.
But what if they can't even see the markings on the drum?
If the markings are obscured, then they can use mirrors or a remote camera system, just like with that cable marking we talked about earlier.
Okay. So always a way to make sure that they have that visual feedback. Awesome. Well, we've covered quite a few different operational aids here, and it's clear that these aren't just, bureaucratic checkboxes that we have to tick off. These are really important safety features.
Right.
And it's not just about avoiding OSHA fines. It's about, preventing accidents and making sure that everybody goes home safe at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these are literally life-saving devices that we're talking about here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But let's get real for a second.
Sure.
Let's say you're a worker on a construction site. You're working near a crane. Maybe you're not even directly involved in the operation. Why should you care about any of this?
That's a great point. Because if you're working around a crane, then you're essentially in its hazard zone.
Yeah.
So understanding what those operational aids are, what they do, and whether or not they're functioning properly, that could be the difference between, a safe day on the job and a really bad day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's about having that situational awareness, even if you're not the one operating the crane.
Right.
Okay, well, before we take a break, I want to touch on something else that came up in our research. And that is the issue of manufacturer demonstrations.
Okay.
So we found out that even someone who's just demonstrating a crane needs to be a certified operator if they're actually controlling the crane during the demo.
That's right.
And that seemed a little surprising at first. So why is that?
Because safety starts the moment that crane arrives on the job site.
Totally.
It doesn't matter if it's a full-blown lifting operation or just a simple demo. If someone is controlling that crane, they need to be qualified.
Okay, so no exceptions there. It's about setting that standard from the get-go.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Now, speaking of qualifications, we also talked about OSHA 10-hour training. And we learned that while it's not a federal requirement for those OEM representatives who might be doing these demos, some states actually do require it.
Right.
So that's just another reminder that it's always a good idea to check those local regulations.
Yeah.
Because things can vary from state to state. All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground here today, getting a good foundation for understanding these important safety features.
Right.
We'll be back in a flash to continue our deep dive into crane safety and operational aids, so don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to our deep dive, where we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of crane safety and operational aids.
I'm ready for more. It's like we've opened up this Pandora's box of safety regulations, and I'm fascinated.
And you know what's really interesting about this whole topic is that sometimes OSHA's interpretation of these regulations is, well, a little open to interpretation.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
So how do we know what's what?
That's where those OSHA interpretation letters come in. They give us real-world examples and clarify some of those gray areas.
Okay, I love a good clarification. Give me an example that really stood out to you.
Well, one that comes to mind involves those outrigger stabilizer position sensors. Remember those Category 2 aids we talked about?
Yeah, the ones that make sure the outriggers are extended properly for stability.
Exactly. Well, some folks thought that just marking or labeling the outrigger beams would be enough. You know, just a visual indicator to show how far they should be extended.
Yeah, that seems reasonable at first glance. I mean, markings are used for a lot of safety procedures.
Right. But when it comes to crane safety, OSHA wants more than just good intentions. Those markings might be helpful, but they don't provide the same level of assurance as a dedicated sensor.
So it's not just about having a visual reminder, it's about having a system that actually monitors those outriggers in real time.
Exactly. That sensor allows the operator to see what's happening right from the controls, reducing the risk of human error.
So even though markings might seem like a practical solution, they don't quite meet OSHA's high standards for crane safety. It's like showing up for a marathon wearing flip-flops.
Yeah.
You might make it a few miles, but you're not exactly setting yourself up for success.
I love that analogy, and that's why those interpretation letters are so valuable. They help us understand those subtle but important distinctions that can make a huge difference in safety.
Interpretation letters noted. Now let's talk about another clarification. We discussed the hoist drum rotation indicator, the one that shows the operator which way the drum is turning even if they can't see it. There was some debate about whether certain types of joystick controllers could actually qualify as a rotation indicator. What's the deal with that?
So some people argued that a joystick with markings to show hoisting or lowering and a vibration feature that changes intensity based on the drum's speed would be good enough.
Okay, so the joystick would give the operator both directional and speed feedback, even if they couldn't see the drum itself. Seems pretty efficient.
The key here is that a true hoist drum rotation indicator has to show the actual rotation, not just the intended rotation.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So the joystick might tell you what you're trying to do, but if there's a malfunction, the drum could be doing something completely different.
Exactly, and that's a critical distinction. In a high-pressure situation, a joystick could give the operator false information, leading to a dangerous situation. A dedicated rotation indicator, on the other hand, will always reflect what's really happening with the drum.
So it's all about having that reliable source of information even when things go wrong.
Exactly. It's about ensuring the operator has the most accurate information possible to make safe decisions.
Okay, that makes sense. These examples really highlight that crane safety goes beyond just checking boxes and following the bare minimum. It's about understanding the why behind the regulations and striving for the highest level of safety possible.
Absolutely. It's about being proactive, anticipating potential problems, and finding the most robust solutions. And that mindset should be shared by everyone involved in crane operations, not just the operator.
Right. It's a team effort with safety as the common goal. Now, we briefly touched on OEM representatives demonstrating cranes on site. What's the main takeaway there?
The bottom line is if you're controlling that crane, you need to be certified, even if it's just a demo. OSHA doesn't differentiate between a full-fledged lifting operation and a simple demonstration.
So whether you're hoisting tons of steel or just showing off the crane's features, those same safety standards apply.
Exactly. It's all about setting the right tone from the very beginning. When an OEM representative arrives on site, they're showcasing a commitment to safety. It sends a clear message that safety is non-negotiable.
It's about establishing a consistent expectation of professionalism and responsibility from the moment the crane steps foot on the job site.
Well said. Now remember, we mentioned that OSHA 10-hour training isn't federally required for OEM representatives.
Right, but some states might have their own requirements.
Yeah.
So always a good idea to double-check those local regulations.
Precisely. And even though the 10-hour course might not be mandatory in every situation, it's still a valuable tool for anyone in the construction industry. It covers a wide range of safety topics and promotes a culture of awareness and prevention.
So it's always good to have that extra knowledge under your belt. Now I'm sensing a theme here. Awareness prevention going above and beyond. It's not just about following the rules, but exceeding them and creating a culture where safety is everyone's top priority.
You got it. And that brings us to something that often gets overlooked, the age of the crane itself.
Oh, interesting. How does the age of the crane play into all of this? Is it like comparing a vintage car to a brand new model with all the latest bells and whistles?
You could say that crane technology has advanced significantly over the years. Older cranes might not have the same level of sophistication when it comes to operational aids. Some of the safety features we take for granted today simply didn't exist back then.
So working with an older crane might require a different approach to safety. We need to be more aware of potential risks because we can't rely on technology to do all the work for us.
Precisely. You might need to rely more on manual checks, visual inspections, and good old-fashioned communication to ensure everything is running smoothly.
So it's not that older cranes are inherently unsafe, but we need to be extra cautious and aware of their limitations.
Exactly. It's about tailoring your safety practices to the specific equipment you're working with. And that leads us to another important consideration, the type of work being done.
Okay, hit me with it. How does the nature of the work influence operational aid requirements?
Remember those exceptions we talked about for the anti-tube locking device on lattice boom cranes? That's a perfect example of how the type of work can change those safety requirements. Certain tasks like pile driving might not need the same level of automated safety features as other operations.
So it's a case-by-case basis. The work itself dictates which operational aids are necessary and how they should be used.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between safety and practicality. And that's where experience, knowledge, and careful planning come in. It's not just about blindly following a checklist. It's about understanding the nuances of the work and making informed decisions to mitigate those risks.
This has been eye-opening. We've gone from the specifics of operational aids to these broader ideas of building a safety-first culture. Any final thoughts before we wrap up part 2?
I want to challenge our listeners. Next time you're on a site with a crane, take a moment to really observe. Look at the crane, its operational aids, the people working around it. Ask yourself some questions.
Okay, give me that mental checklist.
Yeah.
What should we be looking for?
First, what operational aids do you see? Can you identify them based on what we've talked about?
Okay.
Second, are those aids in good working order? Do they look properly maintained and calibrated? And finally, how are the workers interacting with the crane? Are they following safe practices? Are they communicating effectively?
Those are great points. It's about being more than just a passive observer. It's about becoming an active participant in safety.
Exactly. Safety is everyone's responsibility, and it starts with awareness, education, and speaking up if something seems off. We need to create a culture where safety is a shared value, not just a set of rules.
Well said. We'll be back soon to wrap up our deep dive into crane safety and operational aids. Stay with us. We're back for the final leg of our journey into the world of crane safety, with a special focus on those all-important operational aids.
It's been quite a ride, hasn't it? We've gone from the nitty-gritty details to the bigger picture of creating a safety-first mindset.
I feel like we've given our listeners a whole arsenal of knowledge to really make a difference on their job sites.
I agree, and I hope they're feeling inspired to champion safety in every aspect of their work.
That's the goal. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I wanted to touch on one last piece of the puzzle, the human element.
Ah, yes, the human element.
Yeah.
You can have the most advanced technology, all the bells and whistles, but if people aren't communicating effectively, it's all for naught.
Exactly. You need to create a culture where everyone feels comfortable speaking up if they see something even slightly off, no matter what their role is on the site.
Absolutely. Whether you're the crane operator, the rigger, the signal person, or even just a worker passing by, everyone has a responsibility to point out potential hazards. It's about looking out for each other, building that safety net of communication.
And it's not just about pointing out problems. It's about sharing knowledge, asking questions, making sure everyone understands the risks involved.
Couldn't agree more. It's about empowering everyone on the job site to be a safety advocate. That's how we create a truly safe and productive work environment.
Well said. I think we've covered just about everything we set out to do today. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners before we sign off?
Just this never stop learning crane technology is always evolving, and so are the safety regulations. So stay curious, stay informed, and always make safety your top priority.
Couldn't agree more. A big thanks to Safety One Source for making this deep dive possible. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us. Until next time, stay safe out there.